She didn't fall from grace, she stood in it, while the world looked away. This is the story of a black woman who walks into a gala she secretly funded, only to be humiliated, ignored, and then turned into the headline no one saw coming. In a single moment, what was meant to be a celebration of diversity becomes a mirror for everything the room tried to hide. What happens when the one they tried to erase becomes the only name they remember? Before we dive into this unforgettable story, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story will leave you speechless. Candice Murdoch had been quiet all night, but not because she didn't belong. She'd chosen silence over spectacle, intention over noise. That's how she moved. Smooth, still, measured. Her almond brown eyes tracked everything, always reading the room before the room even knew it needed to be read. But even the most calculating mind can't always see the moment someone decides you're a threat. Whitney Green had been watching her since the woman walked in. That white silk gown, that low bun twisted to perfection, that skin glowing and unbothered like it had never known the cruelty of exclusion. Whitney's smile tightened with each passing minute, her champagne flute never quite making it to her lips. It wasn't just that Candice was beautiful, though she was. It wasn't even the way she moved through the ballroom like she owned it, though in a way she did. No, what unsettled Whitney most was that she couldn't figure out why someone like her was here at all. Not a model, not a socialite, not a reality TV star. No name tag, no PR handler, no telltale need to be photographed. "I'll try you." She paused, then continued. Here doesn't become, which, to someone like Whitney, felt a little too close to defiance. The ballroom glowed with golden chandeliers and music hummed low beneath the chatter. But the moment Candice walked by her table, Whitney's voice cut through the warmth like a blade. "Cute dress," she said sweetly, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I didn't know Ross still sold evening wear." A few snickers fluttered. Candice glanced over, met Whitney's eyes. She didn't smile, didn't roll her eyes, didn't stop. She just kept walking toward the silent corner where the champagne tower waited, a glittering pyramid of fragile elegance, stacked and balanced and backlit like some holy monument. Whitney leaned toward her friends, lips curling. "Watch this," she whispered, and then she stood. One heel after another clicked across the marble floor, slicing the room's atmosphere with performative grace. She reached Candice just as the woman paused in front of the $100,000 champagne display, admiring the engineering. Candice didn't flinch. As Whitney approached, she didn't even turn. "I'm sorry," Whitney said, voice syrupy. "I just realized you're standing a bit too close." Before Candice could register what was happening, Whitney's perfectly manicured hand pressed firmly into her back. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't rough. It was subtle enough to pass as a nudge, innocent enough to look like an accident to anyone not paying close attention. But the result was instant. A heel caught, a body tilted, and then crash. Hundreds of champagne glasses shattered in perfect unison. Golden liquid sprayed across the room like liquid confetti. The sound was deafening. Startled gasps, the scrape of chairs, a rising roar of disbelief. Candice hit the floor first, glass slicing through silk, champagne soaking into fabric, the icy cold wrapping her body in humiliation. And then came the laughter. It wasn't the sharp, cruel laughter of schoolchildren. It was worse. It was refined, polite, restrained enough to pass as amusement, but soaked in condescension. "Oh no!" someone sang, half sarcastic, clapping a hand to their mouth. "Jesus Christ, who invited her?" a man whispered. Candice didn't move. The cold stung, the glass cut. The champagne dripped from her arms, her hair, her waist. Her dress clung to her body like a wet napkin. Eyes circled her like vultures waiting for the twitch of shame. But she gave them nothing. She straightened slowly, her back arched, her arms lowered from the shield they had formed over her face. She stood up, not a hint of apology in her eyes. Not one, and that, somehow, was worse for them. She just gonna stand there? Monica Ray muttered to Whitney, chewing at her lip. She'll cry, Whitney whispered, brushing invisible dust from her satin jumpsuit. Just wait. But Candice didn't cry. Her eyes roamed the room. She looked at the shattered glass, the spilled drink, the faces filled with amusement, the phones now subtly filming. She said nothing, did nothing, just stood. And then the murmurs began. Who is she? I thought she came with the Atlanta group. No, I think she's somebody's assistant. No assistant wears Louboutins like that. Security arrived within seconds. A tall man in a black blazer stepped forward, eyes flickering between the broken display and the soaked woman at its center. "Ma'am," he said stiffly. Not unkind, but not kind either. "I'm going to need you to come with me." Candice's eyes flicked toward him, still calm, still composed. "I'll wait here," she replied, soft but unwavering. "My husband will be arriving shortly." And just like that, the room stirred again. Husband? Wait, did she say husband? Isn't she alone? Whitney crossed her arms, irritation mounting beneath her carefully sculpted brows. "Is this part of some stunt?" she asked aloud, laughing a little too loudly. "I mean, come on. I pushed her by accident. She tripped. No one got hurt." "You pushed her?" someone echoed, confused. "Not like that," Whitney snapped, catching herself. "She was in the way. The glasses were—" She lost her balance. Candice didn't argue, didn't point fingers, didn't defend herself. She just stood in silence, drenched in cold gold, glass glinting at her feet like jagged applause. Her gaze slowly drifted to the ornate double doors at the far end of the ballroom. And then he opened. All eyes turned. The room fell into a strange hush, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of tension, full of suspicion, full of unspoken awareness. A man walked through. Tall, black, mid-40s, charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, just presence. He moved with the ease of a man used to owning rooms like this, not needing to perform, not needing to announce himself. He walked straight toward Candice. No rush, no panic, just purpose. He took off his coat as he reached her and, without a word, placed it over her shoulders. Then he turned to the crowd, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had filmed, the ones who were still wondering who the hell this man was and why he looked so certain. "The woman you just humiliated," he said evenly, "is my wife." No gasp came, just breathless stillness. "And she's the sole sponsor of tonight's gala?" It landed like a bomb. Phones lowered, mouths parted, eyebrows lifted in slow, dawning horror. "Whitney?" She went pale, most comically pale. Candice's fingers gently clutched the edges of the coat. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The room had already decided who she was, and now it was realizing how wrong it had been. But the shame wasn't hers to carry. Not anymore. Not ever. The marble beneath Candice's heels had gone slick with champagne, but she stood firm. Noah's coat hung heavy on her shoulders, rich wool soaked at the collar from her drenched hair. Still, she didn't flinch. The crowd inched backward, not out of fear, but discomfort. No one knew what to do when dignity didn't break. Security hadn't moved. David Cole, the head of the event's private team, shifted awkwardly. He'd followed protocol when he approached her minutes earlier. Woman, soaked, champagne tower destroyed. host demanding action. Escort her out. That's what he was told. But now she was the wife of the event's sponsor. Now she had a name, Murdoch. And David suddenly wasn't sure what he'd just walked into. Still, the velvet rope instincts ran deep. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Ma'am, we'd still like to speak with you privately, just to clarify what happened." Candice's eyes slid toward him, quiet, sharp. She didn't answer right away, and that made the silence stretch until it snapped. "My wife isn't going anywhere," Noah said calmly, his voice low but absolute. "Not until someone explains why she was assaulted in the middle of a ballroom full of witnesses." The word assaulted echoed louder than any raised voice ever could. It wasn't shouted. It was said plainly, with certainty, like something already decided by a judge. People shifted, couples whispered, phones disappeared into clutches and coat pockets. Whitney, standing at the edge of it all, froze. "You're twisting it," she muttered, loud enough to reach a few ears. "I didn't assault her. That's insane." Her voice cracked at the end, the kind of crack that came not from guilt, but panic. Monica, standing behind her, leaned in and whispered, "Just stop talking." But Whitney wasn't done. She never knew when to stop. "It was a joke," she said louder. "God, it was a joke. Everyone saw it." Candice turned her head slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't change her expression. "Do you think pushing someone into glass is a joke?" Her words were soft, too soft. The kind that made people lean in, and when they leaned in, they heard the steel underneath. Whitney scoffed, but it came out brittle. "Okay, I didn't push you. You stumbled." Candice stepped forward, her dress clinging to her like second skin. Noah stayed beside her, silent now, letting her speak. "You placed your hand on my back," Candice said. "You leaned in, you whispered something. Then I went forward. Don't call that a stumble." Whitney opened her mouth, then closed it. The moment held. David Cole rubbed the back of his neck. His earpiece buzzed faintly, but he ignored it. What did protocol say now, when the woman standing in front of him wasn't just a guest, but a benefactor? "Ma'am, I apologize for the earlier assumption," he said, his voice lowering. "I didn't realize." "You didn't ask," Noah interrupted. That shot David down. Candice didn't blink. "You saw a black woman in a ruined dress standing near a broken display," she said, "and you assumed I didn't belong." David opened his mouth, but Candy held up a single finger. "I'm not accusing you. I'm reminding you." The phrase landed with such precision that even those in the back of the room reacted. People weren't used to directness spoken so gently. It didn't let you argue. It just sat there. Truth in a tailored coat. Grace Thompson, the event coordinator, rushed in just then, breathless and smiling the kind of desperate smile worn by people trying to fix things without touching them. "Mrs. Murdoch," she chirped, voice 2 octaves too high. "Oh my goodness, we are so terribly sorry for this whole misunderstanding." Candice turned. Grace was all pearls and clipboard, hiding behind her earpiece and perfume. "Are you?" Candice asked. Grace blinked. "Of course. Yes, this is not at all what we intended. You've been so generous to our cause. We're devastated this happened to you." Candice studied her. "What's my name?" she asked. Grace's mouth opened and stayed open. "You said I was generous, that I supported your cause. So what's my name?" Grace floundered. "Candice," Noah said quietly, resting a hand on her shoulder. Not to stop her, just to be with her. Candice looked back at Grace. "You didn't know my name until 10 seconds ago, and you wouldn't have learned it if my husband hadn't walked through that door. You planned an event based on honoring diverse voices, but you never thought to know mine." The smile on Grace's face collapsed like over-whipped cream. I think we should move this conversation into a more private—" "No," Noah cut in. "This happened in public. We'll address it in public." And so it stayed. The room, once roaring with ego and orchestras, now watched in heavy silence. Even the band had stopped playing, their instruments waiting mid-note like held breath. Tiffany Lewis, a local journalist, stood near the back, with her phone still recording. She had recognized Candice earlier, but hadn't been sure until Noah said the name. Now she wasn't just watching, she was documenting. From her corner, Monica leaned toward Whitney, her voice low and urgent. "You need to apologize." Whitney's lips curled. "For what?" "Giving her a little push?" "You don't get it," Monica hissed. "She owns the whole damn night. You just made yourself the story." Whitney looked at Candice, really looked at her for the first time. She saw the composure, the strength, the utter refusal to perform pain for anyone's comfort, and for the first time in her life, Whitney didn't know how to win. She took a shaky step forward. "I'm sorry," she said. The words felt foreign in her mouth, dry, unpolished. Candice turned. "For what?" Whitney paused. For pushing you, for embarrassing you." Candice let the silence stretch. "That's not what embarrassed me." Whitney blinked. "You're apologizing for what everyone saw, but not for what you meant." And just like that, Candy stepped back into Noah's coat, pulled it tighter around herself, and turned toward the ballroom doors. She didn't leave, not yet. But her message was clear. She would stay on her own terms. The rest of them would have to adjust. Whitney Green's cheeks burned. Not from embarrassment, she wasn't wired that way, but from exposure, the kind she couldn't spin, the kind that left fingerprints. Her perfectly curated world had just slipped out of her hands like a champagne flute left too close to the edge. Now all eyes that once adored her avoided her. It was the worst thing in her world, to be looked past. She stormed back to her circle, heels clicking sharply, as if noise could reclaim authority. Monica Ray, always the observer, followed in silence, her mind processing 100 thoughts per second. They settled back near the banquet table where the other influencers and socialites had gathered before things exploded. Glittered bodies in designer gowns leaned close, whispering behind manicured hands, sneaking glances toward the soaked woman still standing tall near the ruined champagne tower. "He played that well," muttered Ava Lynn, a TikTok nutritionist known more for her filter work than her medical advice. "Didn't even raise her voice." "That's the point," Monica replied without looking at her. "She didn't have to." Whitney snatched a napkin from the table and dabbed at her forehead, which didn't need dabbing. Her jaw clenched as she stared out across the ballroom. "She made it into something it wasn't," she hissed. Monica turned to her. "What was it, Whit?" "I told you. A joke. A shove." She got dramatic. "You shoved her into a $100,000 0 cents display," Monica said slowly, like she was trying to help Whitney hear her own words out loud. "At a gala, while she was standing still. She was in the way." "Whit." Monica's voice lowered. "You made a fool of yourself. That's what happened." Whitney's face twisted. "No. She ambushed me. I don't know who told her to come here like that, but that woman was daring me to say something the second she walked in. I could feel it." A moment passed. Monica didn't reply. Instead, she reached for a glass of something strong and took a slow sip. Around them, other women nodded in polite sympathy, but none moved closer. It was a subtle shift, but one Whitney felt. The port was retracting, influence bleeding at the edges. Across the ballroom, Candice stood in Noah's coat with her spine unbowed. She didn't speak, didn't gesture. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was altering the air in the room. The shame that Whitney assumed would stick to Candice now clung to her instead. That thought made Whitney's skin crawl. How was I supposed to know she was someone important? She snapped. Monica leaned in, her tone soft but scalpel sharp. You didn't have to know who she was to not push her into a glass tower, Whitney. Whitney scowled. She acted like she owned the place. Monica turned fully now. Her voice dropped. She does. The silence between them said everything. Whitney stared at Monica, not used to hearing challenge in her voice. Monica had always been a second-row girl, supportive, agreeable, quick to post a selfie with Whitney front and center. But now she looked tired. Or maybe just done. You're really siding with her? Whitney asked. Monica shrugged. I'm siding with the truth, and the truth is, we looked like bullies. The word hit hard. Whitney took a step back like she'd been slapped. Monica's eyes followed Candice as she stepped away from the center of the room, crossing slowly toward one of the side corridors. Grace Thompson trailed her at a distance, still trying to spin what was now beyond control. Whitney grabbed Monica's arm. She's going to ruin me. Monica sighed and gently pulled free. She didn't ruin you, she said. You did that all by yourself. And then she walked away. Whitney stood in place, drowning in stillness. The lights above sparkled off the marble floors, but they didn't warm her. She was cold now. Not from climate, but from detachment. The very crowd that once revolved around her was already rebalancing. The orbit was changing. They were looking at Candice now, not with pity, but curiosity. Respect. A kind of attention Whitney had never earned, only demanded. She spun around, trying to recenter herself. Cameras still lingered. Reporters whispered with pens hovering. She knew the game, knew the damage control strategies. It wasn't too late. Not if she could cry on cue. Not if she could twist the narrative. She found a waiter and snatched a champagne flute from the tray. "Can I speak to the press?" she asked, mostly to herself. The waiter blinked. "I think they're already speaking to her." Whitney turned, heart thumping. At the far end of the room, Tiffany Lewis stood with Candice. No microphone, just a phone held casually, recording something intimate and real. Candice's voice wasn't raised. Her hands didn't move. But people stood nearby, listening, actually listening. And then someone clapped. Not loud, just one slow clap. Then another. It spread like wildfire. Not unanimous, not instant, but it grew. A ripple of respect, not performance. Whitney's stomach twisted. He'd come, she wasn't in it. Not in the frame, not in the light, not even in the room's memory of the last 20 minutes. She was just the girl who pushed someone who mattered more than she could understand. She downed the champagne, the bubbles hitting her throat like static. And for the first time that night, she felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't guilt. Not yet, but it was close. Clara Bishop's stilettos clicked too loud on the marble as she hurried across the ballroom, clipboard clutched in one hand, phone trembling in the other. The event was supposed to be flawless. Press ready, Instagram perfect, socially approved. It had taken 8 months of planning, 3 brand sponsors, and 2 silent donors to pull together this diversity and excellence gala. And now? Now there was glass on the floor. There were murmurs about lawsuits. And there, right in the center of the PR disaster, stood a woman Clara had never taken the time to properly meet. She spotted Candice near the corridor by the side exit, standing beside her husband, Noah, who leaned against the wall with his hands in his pockets like he was waiting for someone to apologize. Candice still wore his coat over her soaked gown, and yet somehow she looked regal, like the moment hadn't broken her, only peeled back a layer. Clara inhaled and walked toward them. She practiced her expression in the 2 seconds it took, concerned, warm, open, not too rehearsed. "Candice," she said with the soft urgency of someone pretending they'd been in control all along. "There you are. I wanted to check on you. Personally. I am so terribly sorry." Candice turned her head, slowly, eyes heavy-lidded and unreadable. Noah didn't move. His gaze stayed on Clara, unwavering. Clara offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This should never have happened. I didn't even realize you were here until I saw the tower come down. I mean, what a nightmare." Candice didn't speak, and Clara felt the air grow too still. She cleared her throat and kept going. "I want to make this right. We'll cover the gown, of course. Dry cleaning, or a replacement if needed. I can contact a stylist personally, someone discreet, if that's preferred." Noah's brow ticked upward. "Is that your concern right now?" he asked. Clara's mouth opened, paused, then tried again. "Well, of course it's not the only concern," she said, voice pitching higher. "But it's a start. I just want her to know we're taking it seriously." Candice finally spoke, her voice low and even. "You didn't know I was here?" Clara's breath caught. No, I mean, your name wasn't on the list. We were told the donor would be anonymous." I wasn't anonymous," Candice said. "My name was on the foundation letterhead. It was printed at the bottom of every check." Clara blinked. "Oh, I must have missed that." Candice's smile was soft. Too soft. "Of course you did." That stung more than a shout ever could. Clara felt it land, felt the subtle rebuke settle over her like dust. "I didn't mean," she started. "But you did," Noah interrupted. "You meant exactly what you showed us, that you don't look for names that don't match the faces you expect." Clara stiffened. "That's not fair." "It's not?" he asked. "She paid for this ballroom, for these caterers, for your ridiculous floating flower installation. And you didn't even know she was standing 10 feet from you when your guest pushed her into $100,000 of glass." Clara's voice shrank. "It wasn't meant that it happened." Candice lifted her hand slightly, silencing them both. She turned to Clara. "Tell me something," she said. "When you pitched this gala to your sponsors, what did you say about diversity?" Clara shifted. "We said we wanted to highlight underrepresented voices, create visibility, elevate overlooked narratives. You know, the usual." Candice tilted her head. "And yet when a black woman stood at the center of the room, in full view, being laughed at, you didn't recognize her. You didn't approach her. You didn't even think she could be the person who paid for your precious cause." Clara's cheeks colored. "I didn't laugh." "No," Candice said. "You just stayed silent." A few feet away, a couple of guests hovered awkwardly, pretending to study a painting on the wall. They weren't listening, but they were. Everyone was. The whispers had turned into a quiet tension that wrapped around the event like fog. Candice took a step closer. "I didn't come here tonight to be seen, but I also didn't come to be invisible." Clara swallowed. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't look," Candice corrected. Noah exhaled slowly, watching the coordinator crumble. "We'll leave now," he said. "You have cleanup to do." Candice turned. She didn't storm off. She walked. Fluid. Controlled. The kind of grace that didn't ask permission to exist. Clara stood frozen, clipboard still in hand, suddenly useless. Back at the ballroom's main floor, people watched them pass. Candice moved through the crowd, head high, her ruined gown trailing droplets along the path. No one dared stop her. No one dared pretend this hadn't just shifted everything. The ones who had laughed now watched with apology etched into their faces. The ones who had judged now stood in quiet awe, and those who hadn't noticed her at all now couldn't look away. Noah opened the grand door for her, held it, and then followed her out without saying another word. Inside, Clara finally let her breath go. It trembled. Tiffany Lewis, the reporter, approached a second later. "Miss Bishop," she said, voice soft but alert, "care to make a statement on what just happened?" Clara closed her eyes. For once she had no script. The ballroom doors were still swinging when the whispers started chasing Candice and Noah down the corridor. They didn't rush. That was the part that unnerved everyone watching from inside. They didn't stomp, didn't cry, didn't flail their arms or raise their voices. They simply walked, the weight of the room's guilt trailing behind them like perfume. Noah's hand stayed at the small of Candice's back. Not protective, not guiding, just there, steady, like a compass. As they reached the lobby, a young attendant wearing a headset stood from behind the reception desk and tried to smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Murdoch, can I get you a car brought around?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Candice nodded once. "Yes, please." The girl pressed her earpiece and relayed the request, not meeting Candice's eyes. Guilt radiated off her like heat. She hadn't done anything wrong, not directly. But she had watched, wide-eyed and motionless, when it all happened. Now she didn't know what to say. Noah moved to one of the leather lobby chairs and slipped off his jacket, gently draping it again over Candice's shoulders. He crouched in front of her, checking the scrape on her shin where a piece of crystal had nicked her during the fall. It was small, but bright against her dark skin, and still beating with blood. She looked down at him. "I'm okay." "I know," he said, eyes lifting to hers. "But you shouldn't have to be." A silence passed between them that said more than any press release or public apology ever could. "I didn't expect them to know me," Candice murmured. "But I didn't expect them to assume I didn't matter." Noah's jaw clenched. "You know how they see us." "You always knew." She smiled faintly. "I did. I just didn't think it would sting like that. Not tonight." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. Yes, he still carried one, and gently dabbed at her knee. "You didn't break," he said. "No," she whispered, "but I think they did." Just then, the glass doors swung open again. A tall man in a three-piece charcoal suit stepped in from the street, his gait easy, his expression unreadable. He scanned the lobby, and when his eyes landed on Candice, they softened. "Elijah," Noah said, standing. Reverend Elijah Grant smiled as he approached. "Heard there was trouble." "How'd you find out so fast?" Candice asked, managing a tired smile. "You kidding? This city runs on gossip and Twitter," Elijah said. "I saw your name trending before dessert hit my table. You okay?" "I'm holding," she said. He reached for her hand, gave it a squeeze. "You shouldn't have had to. Seems to be the theme of the night." Elijah turned to Noah. "What's the fallout look like?" "Still forming," Noah replied. "But there were phones out, and there were eyes. Eventually the truth catches up." Candice tilted her head. "Sometimes it limps. Sometimes it sprints," Elijah countered, "especially when the wrong people try to outrun it." He looked toward the doors again, then back at her. "You planning to speak on this?" "I haven't decided," she said. "Doesn't feel like my job to fix what broke." "It's not," he agreed. "But sometimes just standing still makes people listen." Candice nodded slowly. She felt the truth of that. She'd stood still in that ballroom, drenched, bleeding, silent. And yet, it had been the most powerful thing she'd ever done. "You know," Elijah added, lowering his voice, "this reminds me of a passage my grandmother used to repeat. They'll count you out, then ask how you did it when you win anyway." Noah smiled faintly. She always had a way with words. "She did," Elijah said, then looked back at Candice. But you have a way of proving them right. She looked up at the Reverend, then at the marble floor beneath her heels. There was no broken glass here, no whispers, no smirks. Just her husband, a loyal friend, and a young girl in a headset trying to pretend this wasn't the most uncomfortable night of her job. Candice stood, adjusting the coat around her shoulders. The warmth was returning to her limbs. She'd let herself feel everything: humiliation, disbelief, grief. But now came clarity, and with it direction. She turned to the attendant. "Is the car ready?" The girl nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. Pulled up just now." Candice thanked her, then walked toward the door with Noah and Elijah flanking her. As she stepped into the evening air, the cold wind wrapped around her like a second voice. Not cruel, just real. A reminder that life didn't pause for dignity. It simply revealed who carried it. The black SUV idled at the curb. The driver stepped out to open the door. Before Candice got in, she looked back at the glowing building behind her. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could still see silhouettes moving about. People laughing, drinking, recovering, as if nothing had happened. As if the trauma had been absorbed by the floor, wiped clean like a wine spill. But not everyone had moved on. Some were still frozen. Some were still watching the doorway. And some, Candy was sure, were finally quietly seeing her. The man in the doorway had made them pause. But the woman who stood in the wreckage had made them think. She ducked into the car, and Noah followed, his hand settling in hers. Elijah leaned in before the door closed. "If you speak," he said gently, "make them remember." Candice looked back at him. "I won't speak to be remembered," she said. "Then why?" "I'll speak so no one else has to do it this way again." Elijah nodded, his eyes glinting. The door shut, the car pulled away. And inside that grand ballroom, a silence lingered, not just from what had happened, but from the realization that something far bigger had just begun. Back inside the ballroom, no one danced. The music played, yes. Soft jazz tones humming from the grand piano in the corner. But no one moved. It floated over the crowd like a ghost, haunting what had once been a scene of elegance, now cracked and fragile. People clutched glasses without sipping, waiters refilled water without asking, conversations began and died in the same breath. The energy had shifted, not from drama, much from revelation. Whitney stood near the drink station, arms crossed tight under her shawl. Her earlier confidence had wilted into something smaller, something defensive. Every time someone glanced her way, she felt it, not pity, not sympathy. Distance. A few feet away, Monica scrolled through her phone, jaw set, fingers tense. Her expression flickered with every headline she read. Woman pushed into $100 0 cents. K champagne display at diversity gala. Turns out she funded the event. Socialite under fire after humiliating major donor at Black Excellence Ball. Candice Murdoch, identified as lead benefactor of gala. Public reaction explodes. The comments were brutal, the footage even worse. Someone had caught the entire moment, Candice standing poised, champagne dripping from her hair, Whitney laughing just seconds after the crash. It was already on 3 major blogs and beginning to pick up national attention. Influencer gossip accounts were running stories, and PR agencies were already crafting statements for clients who hadn't even been involved, just in case the fallout spread like wildfire. Monica finally looked up and said nothing. The weight of it all just pressed against her lungs. Clara Bishop, the event host, stood frozen near the stage, whispering furiously with Grace Thompson, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "Do we issue a statement tonight or wait until morning?" Grace asked, voice shaking. "If we wait, we look indifferent," Clara said, trying to stay composed. If we speak now, we risk saying something we can't control. Candice isn't answering any messages. She doesn't need to. She already said everything with her silence. Grace's eyes darted to the guests around them. What do we do? Clara swallowed. We pivot. Thus? Clara didn't have an answer, because this wasn't a typo on a program. This wasn't a seating mistake or a last-minute caterer issue. This was exposure. The whole event had been built on the idea of honoring Black excellence, on uplifting underrepresented voices and shifting perceptions. It was supposed to be progressive, inclusive, enlightened. Eventually, the doom would, and yet they hadn't even recognized the very woman who funded it all when she was drenched in their embarrassment. They had applauded diversity on a stage, but ignored it when it walked among them. Now the room pulsed with a quiet shame, the kind that couldn't be scrubbed out with an Instagram caption or a filtered group photo. Near the back of the ballroom, a new figure entered quietly. Ellis Monroe, one of the city's most respected fashion designers, stepped in with a minimalist coat draped over his shoulders. He was rarely seen at social events anymore, but the moment he heard what had happened, who it had happened to, he showed up. People noticed, eyes turned. He didn't say a word, just made his way to the center of the ballroom, where a few remaining guests stood in clumps, whispering. "Where is she?" he asked. Monica looked up from her phone. "She left, maybe 20 minutes ago." Ellis frowned. "Did anyone thank her before she walked out?" Silence. He nodded slowly, jaw tightening. Then he walked toward the stage, bypassing Clara and Grace without a glance. Clara reached out to stop him, but his expression silenced her before she could speak. He took the mic. No feedback. Just the immediate hush of a crowd desperate to be told how to feel. Ellis's voice was smooth, deep, and controlled. "I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight, but sometimes silence is a luxury we can't afford." The room froze. "We gathered here to celebrate excellence, to honor the people whose stories have been erased or overlooked, to raise money for communities that rarely see this level of investment. And yet, the very woman responsible for funding tonight's gala was not only overlooked, she was humiliated." He paused. The weight of his words settled over the crowd like fog. "I've known Candice Murdoch for over a decade. She doesn't wear her wealth like a badge. She doesn't announce herself when she enters a room. But she moves things, quietly, powerfully. She funds scholarships, revitalizes neighborhoods, writes checks to causes that don't even know her name because she doesn't care about credit. She cares about change." The room stayed silent, eyes locked on him. "Tonight, we showed her who we really are." Monica lowered her head. Whitney looked like she wanted to vanish into the floor. Ellis continued, "I've stood in rooms like this my whole life. Rooms full of polite racism wrapped in applause. Rooms that love Black culture but flinch at Black presence. Rooms that chant diversity from podiums but whisper suspicion when someone who looks like me sits in the front row." He let the silence hang. But tonight, Candice didn't just sit in the front row. She owned the stage. "We didn't even see her." A single clap broke the silence. Then another. Soon hands came together slowly across the room. Not with the thunder of celebration, but the echo of accountability. Whitney didn't clap. She stared straight ahead, the shame no longer abstract but living, breathing, settling over her like dust she couldn't brush off. Ellis set the microphone down gently, then walked off stage without waiting for a response. Clara stepped forward, mouth open, hand lifted, but she had nothing left to say. The applause faded. The guests returned to their corners. But something had changed. Not just the night, not just the story. The balance of power had shifted, and for the first time, They weren't asking who Candice Murdoch was. They were asking how they'd ever missed her. Whitney Green locked herself in the bathroom. The heavy wooden door muffled the voices and clinking glasses outside, but it couldn't drown out the sound of her own breathing. Shallow, sharp, panicked, she gripped the edges of the marble sink with both hands, eyes glued to her reflection. Her foundation was cracked along her cheekbones, her lipstick faded from stress. She looked real. Too real. She couldn't afford to look real. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification, another tag, another video. She didn't want to look, but she did. She always did. The video was less than a minute long, but it felt like a lifetime. It captured the exact moment Candice hit the tower. The sound of glass cascading to the ground, Whitney's face just seconds later. Smiling, laughing, her voice clear over the music. Guess she couldn't handle the sparkle. The internet had already judged her. It was swift, ruthless, unanimous. People weren't just angry, they were disappointed. They were calling her the face of performative allyship, saying her apology was dry, her behavior spoiled, her whole platform built on empty activism. Every polished brand partnership she'd bragged about was now being tagged in thousands of comments. She turned off her phone. For a second she just stood there, motionless, hoping the silence would undo everything. A knock came at the door. She didn't answer. Another knock. "Whitney?" Monica's voice was low, hesitant. "You okay?" Whitney opened the door just enough to show her face. Monica blinked. "They're about to give closing remarks." "I'm not going back out there," Whitney muttered. "Too late. You're already out there. Your name's trending." Whitney laughed once, bitter and short. "Funny. That used to be a good thing." Monica slipped into the bathroom and shut the door behind her. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "They're talking about releasing a statement." "Who's?" "Clara, Grace, everyone." Whitney looked down at the floor. "Let me guess. Some generic message about how they value inclusivity and don't condone bullying?" Monica shrugged. "Probably, but it won't fix anything." Whitney didn't respond. Monica studied her. "What were you trying to prove?" Whitney looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You saw her, and something in you decided she didn't belong." "Didn't decide anything, she walked in like she owned the place. No badge, no handlers, no introductions. What was I supposed to think? Then maybe she did own the place." Whitney scoffed. "She tricked us." "No," Monica said quietly. "She gave you the opportunity to treat her like everyone else. You just failed." The words stung. Not because they were mean, but because they were true. And Whitney knew it. She sank down onto the bench against the wall, head in her hands. "I've worked so hard to get in these rooms," she whispered. "You know that. Every photo, every brand deal, every follower. I built that. I had to. I didn't come from old money. I made myself." "I know," Monica said gently. "But making yourself doesn't mean you get to unmake others." Whitney said nothing. Her silence was the only honest thing in the room. Monica walked to the door. "They're waiting to see what you'll do next." Whitney looked up. "What can I do?" Monica gave a sad smile. "You can start by listening." And then she left. Whitney sat alone for another minute. Then she stood, splashed water on her face, and took a deep breath. The mirror still didn't show the version of herself she liked, but maybe it never had. She stepped back into the hall, where whispers curled through the air like smoke. Heads turned, conversations paused. Some people pretended not to notice her, but their eyes said otherwise. Clara spotted her immediately. "Whitney," she said, rushing over, voice tight with faux concern. "There's talk of organizing a public statement. We're drafting something now. I need you to sign off." Whitney blinked. "Sign off?" We want to include a quote from you, something about accountability, growth, standing with marginalized communities." Whitney stared at her. "You want me to patch this up with a quote?" Clara hesitated. "Well, yes." Whitney shook her head. "I don't have a quote." Clara tried to smile. "Of course you do. You're you. You've got a million words ready when the camera's on." Whitney's face hardened. "That's the problem, isn't it?" Clara's mouth opened, then shut. Before the tension could thicken, a sharp chime rang through the ballroom. Grace stepped onto the stage, nervous but collected. "If I can have everyone's attention, we'll be giving our closing remarks shortly. Please return to your seats." People moved slowly, not out of disinterest, but caution, like everything could collapse again if they stepped wrong. Whitney remained standing. She didn't want to see. She didn't want to blend into the background and pretend her moment hadn't happened. She turned toward the side exit instead and paused. Through the tall windows, she could see camera crews gathering at the end of the street, reporters setting up, journalists interviewing attendees. The world outside was already spinning the story, and inside this ballroom, her name was no longer hers to control. No post could fix it. No filter could hide it. For the first time in her curated life, Whitney Green had no brand to protect, because her brand had already chosen a side. And now people were choosing theirs. The ballroom had gone quiet again, not empty, just muted, a hush that came not from reverence but reckoning. Like everyone was waiting for permission to feel something different. The tables, once buzzing with chatter and clinking glassware, now sat half-abandoned, plates still held untouched hors d'oeuvres. Half-empty champagne flutes glimmered in the low amber light. People lingered at the edges of the room, no longer sure if they were guests at a celebration or witnesses to a reckoning. In the far corner, Tiffany Lewis adjusted the focus on her phone, watching the video she'd captured for what had to be the 20th time. The way Candice stood there, drenched, calm, alone, while everyone else recoiled or laughed. That image had seared itself into the collective memory of the night. It wasn't the fall that had gone viral. It was the stillness after. A black woman soaked in opulence and shame, refusing to look away. Tiffany knew stories. She knew how they moved. And this one was no longer in her hands. It had already taken flight. Not far from her, a man in his late 40s stood at the bar. He wore a suit just a little too tight and had spent most of the evening mingling with donors he didn't respect. But now his drink sat untouched, his eyes fixed on the stage, where the microphone still waited. He didn't know Candice personally, but he knew the type of woman she was. His mother had been one. His sister still was. And deep down, something about watching her get pushed, humiliated, and then rise without a single word of rage had stirred something uncomfortable in him. Guilt wasn't a feeling he liked, but it was sitting next to him now, tapping its fingers on the table. In a corner near the catering station, David Cole, the head of security, stood with his arms crossed. He'd already run the replay in his head too many times, his voice asking Candice to step outside, his assumption that she was the problem. Not Whitney, not the laughing crowd, the soaked woman. He hadn't meant to choose sides, but he had. And now he stood there, uniform sharp, posture straight, but stomach tight with the realization that he'd helped reinforce something that should have died decades ago. "I didn't even ask her name," he muttered to himself. Across the room, someone else finally spoke. "I owe her an apology." The words came from Monica. She stood near the center of the ballroom, arms folded, eyes low. She didn't say it loud, but she didn't whisper either, and the people around her heard. One woman shifted beside her, hesitant. "Do you think she'll even accept one?" "I don't know," Monica said. but that doesn't change the fact that she deserves it. That was when the room shifted again. Not physically, but emotionally, because for the first time that night, someone wasn't trying to fix the optics. They were confronting the truth. A man nearby stepped forward. "We all laughed," he said quietly. "Not all of us," another corrected gently, "but most of us didn't do anything." That silence, the one no one had wanted to own, was now breaking into pieces. People were naming it, sitting in it, letting it settle. And in doing so, it was starting to lift. Tiffany approached the group, still holding her phone. "I recorded it," she said. "But not to shame anyone, I just knew it meant something." Monica nodded. "It did." Tiffany bit her lip. "Should I take it down?" "No," Monica replied after a moment. "People need to see it." "It's already got over 600,000 views," Tiffany added. "And not just angry comments. I've seen women saying they felt seen for the first time. Like her just standing there, said everything they've ever wanted to say." A soft silence followed. Then someone else spoke. "I didn't know who she was. I assumed she was someone's assistant." A pause. Another voice. "I thought she crashed the event." Another. "I thought she looked too confident." The admissions spilled slowly, one after another, like confessions without a priest. Whitney, still standing near the side doors, heard every word. Her chest tightened. She had said nothing since coming out of the bathroom. She hadn't approached anyone, hadn't defended herself, hadn't fled either. She simply listened. And for once, the silence she sat in wasn't about control. It was about consequence. Across the room, Grace and Clara stood near the stage, watching everything unfold. Clara held a stack of cue cards in one hand, notes for the closing remarks she was supposed to give. But none of them mattered now. "How do I follow this?" she whispered. "You don't," Grace said. "You just stop pretending." Clara looked at her. Grace nodded toward the stage. "Say her name, tell the truth. Or don't speak at all." Clara's hand trembled slightly as she stepped up to the podium. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight cast her in white. The room held its breath. She looked down at her cards, then back at the crowd, and then, gently, she let the cards fall to the floor. "I planned to close tonight with a list of names and thank yous, sponsors, designers, donors. I had all the right words written down." She paused. "But then we proved that having the right words means nothing when we don't live them." The crowd stayed still. Clara continued. "Candice Murdoch was not just a guest tonight. She was the heart of this event. She funded it, believed in it, and we failed her." A murmur. Soft. Heartbreaking. We talk about diversity, about honoring Black excellence, and yet when excellence stood in front of us, wet, bleeding, humiliated, we laughed. We questioned her. We turned away. She swallowed. "And for that I am sorry." A hush. Then slowly a woman stood. Not Whitney, not Monica. A stranger. She stood, one hand placed over her heart. Then another person stood, and then another. Within seconds, the room was on its feet, not cheering, not clapping, just standing. For Candice. For what they saw now. For what they'd refused to see before. Whitney didn't move. She simply looked toward the empty door where Candice had once stood. And finally, without fanfare, lowered her head. By the next morning, Candice Murdoch's name was everywhere. It wasn't just the video anymore. The story had spread across every platform, reaching corners of the internet where gala coverage usually never went. People weren't just reacting. They were responding, sharing, reflecting. Schools, community centers, corporate teams, pastors, teachers, influencers. Every group had latched onto one quiet truth. They had all once been in a room where someone like Candice wasn't seen. The footage had gone global. But it wasn't the spectacle that moved people. It was the stillness. The woman in the soaked white dress, standing unflinching in a storm of glass and shame, refusing to shrink, refusing to plead. No outburst, no meltdown, just presence. That, somehow, had cut deeper than anger ever could. Back at their brownstone, Noah stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove while Candice sat curled on the kitchen stool in one of his hoodies, feet bare, hair tied up in a simple wrap. The news was playing low in the background, but neither of them really listened to it. They didn't need to. The world had finally caught up to the story they already knew. "I got a call from an editor at The Atlantic this morning," Candice said, stirring her tea slowly. "She wants an interview." Noah raised an eyebrow but didn't look away from the stove. "You interested?" "Deal with it." "I don't know." "You don't have to say anything." Candice smiled faintly. "But I might want to." He slid a bowl in front of her. She didn't eat it right away, just let the steam rise and warm her face. "I didn't set out to make a point," she said softly. "I just wanted to be part of something." "You were the entire something," he replied, sitting beside her. Candice looked toward the window, where the city moved on outside like it always did. Buses stopping, people walking dogs, neighbors pulling trash bins to the curb. Life, as usual. And yet, something beneath it all had shifted. "I've been invited to 5 panels already," she added. "One's on Black female empowerment in donor spaces. Another's titled, get this, What We Can Learn from the Gala That Went Wrong." Noah scoffed. "Did they at least spell your name right this time?" "Only 2 of them," she said, laughing softly. "One even called me Candice." He shook his head. "They'll write your name into headlines, but won't write it into the history they claim to be changing." She nodded slowly. "That's the part that stings." They sat in silence, the kind only shared between people who've learned how to hold space for each other without filling it. Then Candice reached for her phone and opened her inbox. Over 100 new messages, some warm, some clumsy, a few performative, but most of them heartfelt. She opened one from a woman named Yvette. "I saw your video last night. I cried because I've been you. Not at a gala, but in a classroom, in a board meeting, at a wedding. Places I was invited to, but made to feel like I didn't belong. The way you stood there made me feel seen. Thank you for not crumbling. You reminded me I'm not invisible." Candice stared at the screen for a long moment, then handed it to Noah. He read it silently. "That's why I might want to speak," she said. "Not for them, for people like her." Noah nodded. They both knew that choosing to speak was different than being handed a microphone. One came from control, the other from power. Real power. And for the first time in a long time, Candice felt powerful. Not because of the headlines, not because of the attention, but because of the clarity. She had survived something many people didn't have the tools or privilege to walk away from, a public humiliation designed to make her feel small, and instead, it had become a mirror for everyone else. Across town, Whitney Green sat in her dim apartment, curtains half drawn, phone still buzzing beside her. She hadn't spoken to anyone all morning, not her agent, not her publicist, not even Monica. Her last post, an apology that read like a press release, had backfired. People called it cold, hollow. A statement, not a reckoning. Some had commented, "Where's the name of the woman you hurt? You sound more sorry for yourself than for her. We don't want your apology, we want your understanding." And now she had neither. She stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the app icons. She could post again, try again, maybe something with a photo this time. Less words, more emotion. But she knew it wouldn't land. Not now. Because Candice had never tried to win the room. And Whitney had. And she'd lost. There was a knock at the door. She hesitated, stood, opened it slowly. It was Monica. She didn't say hello. Just stepped inside, set her bag on the counter, and looked Whitney straight in the eye. You need to stop thinking this is something you can manage. Whitney blinked. I'm not. Yes, you are, Monica cut in. You're trying to brand a response instead of letting yourself feel the consequences. Whitney folded her arms. I already apologized. No, you responded, Monica said, but you never owned it. You never sat in the mess long enough to understand what you actually broke. Whitney's throat tightened. Monica softened her voice. Do you even remember her name? Whitney swallowed. Candice. What's her last name? Silence. Whitney looked down. Monica sighed. You see, you still don't know who she is, just what she did to your image. Whitney leaned against the counter, finally letting the weight settle on her chest. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I know, Monica said. That's the problem. Whitney looked up, tears finally burning at the corners of her eyes. Not because she got caught, but because she didn't know how to make it right. And for the first time she was beginning to realize she might not be the one who gets to. Back at the Murdochs' home, Candice sat by the window, notebook open in her lap. She wasn't writing a speech, or a press statement, or a response. She was making a list. Women she knew. Women who'd been overlooked, undervalued, talked over, misjudged, dismissed. Some were friends, some were strangers, some had been erased completely. She titled the page at the top in bold, black ink, The Names They Never Say, and underneath she wrote, Candice Murdoch. Seen at last. The community center gymnasium smelled like fresh paint and lemon polish. Folding chairs filled the wide space, rows and rows of them, occupied by people who had followed the headlines, watched the videos, read the think pieces, and now waited for her. Some were dressed in suits and heels. Others wore hoodies and sneakers. But they all shared one thing: curiosity sharpened by respect. The organizers hadn't expected this many. They'd planned for 50, maybe 75, but over 100 people had filed in, spilling down the aisles, standing against walls, even peeking through the glass doors. A few came just to be in the same room, not for gossip, not for content, but because they needed to witness something. Candice Murdoch hadn't promised them fireworks. She hadn't even planned to speak at first. But when the story stopped being just her story, when strangers started writing themselves into the silence she left behind, she knew she had to say something out loud. She stepped onto the small wooden stage with quiet steps. No podium, no notes. The microphone on the stand picked up the soft brush of her breath as she looked out over the crowd. No cameras flashed. No music played. Just people. Just stillness. Just truth. She stood there, dressed simply in a slate-gray wrapped dress, her natural curls pinned back, her gaze steady. "Thank you for coming," she began. Her voice was calm, unforced. "I didn't ask for this attention, and I didn't earn it through tragedy. I was simply seen." Finally, a pause, and somehow that was enough to shift everything. Murmurs rose, quiet, reverent. "I was at a gala meant to celebrate voices like mine," she said. "And yet, when I walked into the room, no one knew my name. No one asked. No one needed to know it, because they'd already decided who I wasn't." The crowd listened, fully, Not a single phone out, not a single whisper. I was reminded that night of something I've known since I was a child, that in most rooms I will be questioned before I am welcomed, judged before I am acknowledged, and I've learned to carry that reality with grace. She took a breath, not to hold back tears, there were none, but to let the weight of her words land. They say we're angry. They say we're too sensitive, too loud, too bold. But when we're quiet, when we're simply present, they say we're intimidating. Heads nodded. A woman near the front closed her eyes, like the words echoed something ancient inside her. Candy stepped closer to the edge of the stage. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't throw anything. But still, people shifted away from me like I was the danger. A beat. But that's the part I need you to hear. I wasn't the danger. I was the mirror. The room stilled. They looked at me and saw everything they pretend doesn't exist in their polished lives. Power that doesn't need permission. Confidence that doesn't seek approval. And that's what scared them. A man in the back whispered, "That's real." Candice let that truth rest for a moment before continuing. When the tower fell, I felt the weight of their laughter more than the glass. It wasn't just about spilled champagne. It was about the way people who claimed to support black women revealed how quickly they fold when a black woman stands without explanation. She paused again, letting her words breathe. But something beautiful happened, too. You all happened. The people who reached out, the letters, the stories. I didn't expect them, but I read every single one. And what I found was this: we are not alone in being unseen. We are not alone in being misjudged. We are not alone in standing tall even when everything around us says, "Sit down." The crowd clapped softly. No eruption, no shouting. Just slow, deliberate appreciation. Candy stepped back, just slightly, then nodded once before continuing. "You know, I started making a list last week. I titled it The Names They Never Say." She smiled, gently. It's filled with women who've shaped cities, schools, nonprofits, families, without ever getting the credit. Women who were always there in the background, keeping everything afloat. Women who made space for others, only to be pushed out of the frame when the cameras arrived. A man up front muttered, "My mama's name needs to be on that list." A ripple of laughter followed, then faded into thoughtful silence. "And I'm here today," Candice said, "not because I want attention, but because I want the next black woman who walks into a room like that to be recognized before the damage is done, not after." Applause grew, stronger now, longer. "But most of all," she added, voice steady, "I'm here because my dignity shouldn't be remarkable. It should be normal." The room erupted, not with cheers, but with a powerful, grounded, collective standing ovation. People rose from their seats not because someone else started clapping, but because they felt the shift in their own bodies, felt the truth settle on their shoulders like fabric they'd worn their whole lives, but only now saw clearly. Candice stood still, her hands by her sides, her head bowed, not in humility, but in acknowledgement. When the applause faded, she stepped down from the stage. Dozens wanted to speak to her, shake her hand, thank her. She didn't rush. She moved slowly, embracing strangers who told her, "You made me feel seen," and "I didn't know how to explain it until you stood there." Monica was waiting near the back. When Candice reached her, they didn't speak at first. They just hugged. A long one. No cameras, no words. Just the embrace of two women who had lived parallel truths on opposite sides of a moment. "I should have said something that night," Monica whispered. "You did," Candice replied. "Eventually." Monica nodded, her voice cracking. "I keep saying it." "Good," Candice said. "Just don't let it stop with me." From the corner of the room, Tiffany Lewis raised her camera again. not to capture Candice alone, but to frame her within the sea of people now surrounding her. It wasn't about the fall anymore. It wasn't about Whitney. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about visibility. Candice Murdoch had not demanded to be seen. She had simply refused to disappear. And now, no one could look away. 2 weeks had passed. The city had already moved on to its next drama, its next viral video, its next scandal turned trend. But not everyone forgot. The story of the woman in the Champagne Tower still hovered. Quiet, powerful, necessary. Not because it was loud, but because it seeped. It had seeped into conversations that used to stay surface level. It had reshaped the way people entered rooms, greeted guests, glanced at the only black woman at the table and asked not what she was doing there, but what took them so long to notice her. And for Candice Murdoch, life hadn't just returned to normal. It had redefined what normal meant. She sat in a sunlit cafe off Larchwood Avenue, her laptop open in front of her, the page half filled with grant notes and donor requests. A new project was underway, quiet but mighty. This one wasn't about appearances or fundraisers, it was about infrastructure. She was creating a leadership initiative for black girls in underfunded schools, not just giving scholarships, but mentorship, tools, protection. No speeches, no marble ballrooms, just roots. From across the cafe, a young girl no older than 10 peered at Candice from behind her mother's coat. She clutched a tablet in her arms, fidgeting nervously. Candice noticed her and smiled softly. The girl whispered something to her mom, who nodded. Slowly, she walked up to Candice's table, still gripping the tablet. "Hi," she said, barely above a whisper. "Hey there," Candice said, lowering her screen. "What's your name?" "Madison." "Tishan." "That's a strong name." Madison smiled. "You're the lady from the video." Candice chuckled. "I guess I am." "You didn't yell," Madison said, "even when they were mean." "No," Candice replied. "I didn't." Madison stood straighter. "My teacher showed us your picture and said, 'This is what dignity looks like.'" Candice's throat tightened. "I drew a picture of you," Madison said, turning her tablet around. The sketch was rough, but full of heart. Candice in a white dress, droplets glistening like diamonds, her head held high. But behind her, Madison had drawn other girls. Dozens. All with crowns, all looking forward. "I drew your cape invisible," Madison said, "because I think it's always there even when people don't see it." Candice smiled so gently it almost cracked her heart open. "Thank you, Madison," she said. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever shown me." The little girl beamed, then turned and ran back to her mom. Candice watched them leave, watched the light pour across the sidewalk like something sacred. And she thought, maybe this was the best kind of power, the kind that didn't need applause or microphones, the kind that changed a little girl's posture forever. Across the city, at a community library once nearly shut down from lack of funding, a new wing was being painted. Murdoch Hall. No press invited, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just the quiet sound of brushes over brick, soft voices planning book drives, and kids eating snacks at folding tables as volunteers filed in. Noah leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching as the mural went up. "Black Futures Library," one of the workers said proudly. "That sound right to you?" He nodded. "It sounds perfect." Candice had written the check anonymously, but the neighborhood found out. Not from a headline, from action. From the food pantry she funded. From the summer reading program she designed. From the girls she showed up for, again and again. She never asked to be their icon. She just never left. On the other side of the social universe, Whitney Green logged out of her influencer account. She hadn't posted in over a week. Her manager begged her to stage a comeback. Her agent wanted a rebrand, but Whitney had declined every call. For once, She was listening. And the silence inside her wasn't empty. It was honest. She now volunteered twice a week at a youth center downtown. She didn't post about it. She didn't do it for redemption. She did it because she'd finally met people who didn't care who she had been online, only who she was here. It wasn't a transformation. It was a beginning. She kept a sticky note on her mirror now, 4 words written in her own hand. Witnesses who, a reminder that the next time someone walked in who didn't look like the sponsor, the CEO, the donor, the owner, she wouldn't look past them. She'd look up. Back at the cafe, Candice packed her things, placing Madison's drawing carefully in her folder. She slipped on her coat, the same one Noah had draped over her that night, cleaned now, restitched at the shoulder, but still hers. Her phone buzzed once. Message from Elijah. You moved them without saying a word. Imagine what happens now, that you're ready to speak. She texted back. I don't want to speak to be heard. I want to speak to remind them they're not alone. Outside, the sky glowed soft gold as the sun tilted west. People hurried down sidewalks, voices blending into the hum of life continuing. Candice stepped into that light with quiet strength. She had no entourage, no camera crew, no spotlights, just her name. And this time, it would never be left off the list again.